Welcome in and welcome back. We are here for another episode of Ask Adrian Anything, and today's question comes from Lady Nottingham 89. The question is, I needed this one. Thank you, Adrian. What would you recommend for a reader that is not used to reading poetry? After that poem, I am willing to give it a shot. Now, that is basically the question. How do I get more into poetry? And while I did answer something like this in a previous installment of Adrian Anything, which was episode, hold on, 2, I believe, of Ask Adrian Anything. This question came on a video for Strip Cover Lit, a video which was the weekly reader number 7. And in that video, I shared 2 poems. One was from Emily Dickinson, and the other was from a trench poet from World War I. Now, I am assuming, due to previous conversations I've had with Lady Nottingham 89, that the poem in question was not Emily Dickinson, but was in fact the trench poet. The trench poet was writing about war in World War I. And therein lies the rub. This is something that Lady Nottingham 89 has some experience with. So there's going to be interest inherent to that subject matter. And therein lies the rub. Therein lies the rub. Poetry is highly stylized and more often than not, especially today, very brief. So what you're doing is you're getting a very different reading experience than you get from novels, than you get from short stories, and then you get from nonfiction. Although I do think, and someone's probably going to yell at me for this, I do think that the reading experience in poetry is more akin to the reading experience found in nonfiction than any of those other art forms. And I don't care how many of you are going to tell me that, no, but my favorite author writes such poetic, flowery verse. Shut the hell up. The experience that you're getting from poetry is more often than not creative nonfiction. This is that it is a stylized form of autobiography. Unlike fiction, there is a lot of the author present, and knowingly so. A lot of times what happens with fiction is that a short story or a poem is written, and even the author themselves does not know what the hell it was that they were getting at, does not know what it was roiling in the back of his or her mind that was working so hard to get out until later. Oftentimes with poetry, that's the first thing on the tip of your tongue, if you will pardon me the cliche. It's the first thing out there, and then you have to work backwards from it. You have to take the element that you're working with and drag it back into something that is less obvious than it comes out at first. In fact, many schools of poetry teach you to do that. They teach you to write it like you would say it, as you would explain it. The very first way that it comes out, you write, for example, if you write maybe 3 verses, you write 3 sentences, and then you work to make each one of them weirder as you go. I don't believe in that necessarily, but that's one school of thought on how you write poetry. But the crux is still there. And the crux of the matter simply is, you have to find something that you're interested in, I believe, first and foremost, with poetry, what that becomes is voice. The thing that will draw you most immediately into a poem is the voice of the speaker. And so the problem with that is it's very hard to find, right? So I can tell you, look, my two favorite poets are Charles Bukowski and Emily Dickinson. I can even share the poems with you by which I found them. Emily Dickinson, I died for beauty. I died for beauty, but was scarce adjusted in the tomb. When one who died for truth was lain in an adjoining room, he questioned softly why I failed. For beauty, I replied, and I for truth. The two are one. We brethren are, he said. And so, as kinsmen met a night, we talked between the rooms until the moss had reached our lips and covered up our names. That's the poem by which I found Emily Dickinson. And I don't have the poem memorized by which I found Charles Bukowski, but it is as such. My old man. 16 years old during the Depression, I'd come home drunk in all my clothing. Shorts, shirts, stockings, suitcase, and pages of short stories would be thrown out into the front lawn and about the street. My mother would be waiting behind a tree. Henry, don't go in. He'll kill you. He's read your short stories. I can whip his ass. Henry, please, take this and find yourself a room. But it worried him that I might not finish high school, so I'd be back again. One evening, he walked in with the pages of one of my short stories, which I had never submitted to him, and he said, "This is a great short story." I said, "Okay," and he handed it to me, and I read it. It was about a rich man who had a fight with his wife and had gone out into the night for a cup of coffee and had observed the waitress and the spoons and forks and the salt and pepper shakers and the neon sign in the window. And then he had gone back to his stable to see and touch his favorite horse, who then kicked him in the head and killed him. Somehow the story held meaning for him, though when I had written it I had no idea of what I was writing about. So I told him, "Okay, old man, you can have it." And he took it and walked out and closed the door. I guess that's as close as we ever got. Those are the poems by which I found my favorite poets. But the hell of it is, I can even tell you the story of how I found those poems. The Emily Dickinson poem, I was a sophomore in high school, and I was a football player, and the other football player who sat next to me, we were doing some light bullying, but only because the kid was a prick. I don't remember his name, but every time he wrote the, T-H-E, it looked like 16. It looked like 1 and 6. So we were giving him hell, a little bit of raising. But he was a prick, okay? He deserved it. And we were supposed to be writing about probably whatever Robert Frost poem we had read immediately before this. And then we were assigned I Died for Beauty. And I read that fucking poem, and I didn't come back to the class, to the bullying, to the high school, to the hallway in which we were. I was gone. And from that day forth, that poem stuck with me. And we had an indoor mall in town at the time, Antioch Mall, and there was this little bookstore, little crevice hole in the wall bookstore. And I remember I would go up there in the summer, and this was right as I had my license. And there was this 4-foot section wall of poetry, 12 feet of poetry. And as the summer went on, that section shrunk to 8 feet. And then throughout my junior year, that section shrunk to 4 feet. And eventually, by my senior year, there was no poetry in that bookstore. And after I graduated, the bookstore closed. It all happened that fast. And I would go up there when I went up there, and I would find this collection of Emily Dickinson poems. I don't think this is not the same version. This is not the same book, that is to say. But it was this, the complete poems of Emily Dickinson. And I would go up there, and I would read that poem over and over and over again. And that's how I found Emily Dickinson. Now, the Charles Bukowski poem I found in college. I was 23, 24 at the time, and I was in a class run by a guy named Dr. Roberts, and we had this exact book here, Literature, a Portable Anthology, 2nd edition. And I was supposed to be reading something else, but I didn't care. I was just sort of flipping through the pages, and I came across that poem. And it didn't even really hit me at first. But later in the semester, we were supposed to be writing a paper on one of the poems that we had read that semester. And I had read that poem, and I kept going up to other people in the class. I was like, wait, you know what poem you're writing about? And they'd say, oh, yeah, it's the Robert Frost, da-da-da-da-da. Yeah, well, T.S. Eliot, da-da-da-da-da. And I went up to all of them. I was like, do you remember that poem we read about the guy living in the street and his father was mad at him? Adrian, that never happened. We didn't read that poem. Yeah, all right, whatever. And I'd go up to somebody else. Hey, do you remember that poem we read about the woman hiding in trees and she was yelling at her son about death or something? Do you remember that poem? Do you remember that one? And no one knew what the hell I was talking about, because I didn't know what the hell I was talking about. So I had to write about some Robert Frost poem or something. I don't know. Anyway, that summer, I spent, oh, god damn, so there's 200 poems in here. I was like, I know it's in this collection. I went through all of them. I must have read that poem 3 or 4 times before I realized it was the one I was talking about. It was the one that I vaguely remembered. But I didn't think it was Charles Bukowski, because I had never liked Charles Bukowski before. Until then, I found that poem, and for me, it was the keystone into reading Charles Bukowski. But the hell of it is, I can even tell you why they mean, I can even tell you why they mean so much to me. When I was a kid, look, it's my channel. I'll talk about whatever the hell I want to talk about. There's not going to be any trigger warnings here. I've been a sourpuss and depressed and traipsing the line of suicidal my entire life. My earliest memories were those kinds of memories. So when I found that Emily Dickinson poem, and it was about death, and it was about truth, and it was about beauty, and it was about how all of those things mingle in with one another, and how they all mean so much to one another, boy, it meant so much to me. It was true to me. And I thought about all the things that I found as true, in the meaning that I put into them. Were those things what I found beautiful? What about the things that I found beautiful and worth living for, worth fighting for? Didn't I find those true? So for me, at the tender age of 16, just putting together all of these ideas of symbolism and metaphor and all of these simile, all of these things, and how they relate from the page to the individual and how they transcribe back to the page, it was simply revelatory to me to have something this bold, one step removed from the character actually being truth and the character actually being beauty. It's what they died for. In essence, it's what they lived for. So that's why it meant so much to me. And I took it with me. The Bukowski poem, it's pretty obvious why a guy is going to hang on to that poem and decide it means a lot to him, right? But the hell of it is, I couldn't tell you why those poems meant anything to me when I found them. I just knew somewhere in here, oh, this is the real stuff. This little thing, that's what poetry is. That's where poetry comes from. And so, for example, with the Bukowski poem, I couldn't even remember what the hell it was about. I couldn't even remember what the hell that poem said. But I knew somewhere I needed it. So, if you can't recognize, that wasn't the first time I'd read Bukowski. It was the first time it stuck with me. And now I love everything from Bukowski. That poem from Emily Dickinson was certainly not the easiest poem that we read that semester in school. It was not the boldest, but it stuck with me. Now, none of those things should have been true. I was a little jackass as a 16-year-old, more concerned with lifting weights than reading poetry. But that poem sure did change it for me. So there is some morsel of serendipity involved, but it's not magic. If you roll the dice enough, eventually you're going to get a 7. If you read enough poetry and you pay attention to it, you really pay attention to it, you're going to find one that you like. But I think that it has to be, you have to do it however it will make sense to your sense and sensibility at the time. I'm at the point now with how much I enjoy poetry that I can just sit down and read 100 of them and experience each and every one of them. If you're someone who's trying to find purchase on poetry, that's simply not going to work. It might even be that if you tell yourself, I'm really just going to read one poem every day and try to experience that poem. If you do that, you might not get there. It might not happen for you. And truth be told, you just have to read poetry. You just have to seek it out, find it, read it, and eventually there's going to be something you like. But I would avoid, if you're going to take my words of advice, I would avoid things like this. Immortal Poems of the English Language, an anthology edited by Oscar Williams, 447 British and American masterpieces by 150 poets. Why would I avoid something like this? Because it's going to be all the poems you're supposed to know. And are you supposed to know those poems? Yeah, no, absolutely. You're supposed to know those poems. But no one likes those poems. No one likes those poems. Go down the street and ask anyone, oh yeah, perfect example. Opened it right up to Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley. Percy Shelley, Ozymandias. No one likes that poem. No one who takes poetry seriously likes that poem. No one. Let's see here. Francis Thompson, The Hound of Heaven. Nope. Where are we at here? Let's get some. Oh. Well, Wilfred Owen, a trench poet. Mightn't that be something good? Well, it's Anthem for Doomed Youth and Strange Meeting. Not the greatest by him, but ones you're supposed to know. If you happened upon those, and you even would eventually have a taste for trench poetry, I doubt you would get there by those two examples. I would stick to, ironically, something like this. This is Literature, a Portable Anthology, 2nd edition. This is a stodgy academic collection. Why would I advise you to keep to something like that? Because it's going to be composed by a college professor, a tie someplace, but it's going to be a tie who's pretty sure he's edgy and hip. That's what it's going to be. I'm edgy, I'm hip, I know what the college kids like these days. Mixed with a bunch of different professors from around the country that this guy, this woman, whoever's composing these poems, comprising these poems, anthologizing these poems, whoever that individual is sending letters to all of his or her best friends who are in teaching and say, hey, what can you not live without? You're teaching English 101. What is it that you have to have in here? And they're going to get back to that person and say, these are the ones I can't do without. Hey, did you read that new Sherman Alexie poem? Pretty good, huh? Now that's something by which we can teach whatever it is. There's going to be little suggestions in there that are going to spring up at the edges that hip, edgy college professor is going to listen to. And he's going to put them in. Now, there's still going to be a lot of the stodgy stuff in there. Maybe that's the stuff you fall in love with. I doubt it, especially if you're not the poetry type. But what I would suggest doing is reading as much poetry as you can really pay attention to. Don't zone out. Like I said, it's not a novel. It's not some long, drawn-out process that you can afford to doze off for 3 or 4 pages while Tolkien describes the grass and not lose your place. It's over like that, baby. So, find an author, find a poem that really sticks with you. Write down the name of the author. The cool thing about anthologies like this is they're going to have the dates the author lived as well as the date the poem was published. And some of them even have the date the poem was written or supposedly written. And sometimes those are different dates. Lots of times they're going to be different dates. So write down the date the poem was published. Write down when the author lived. Write down the subject matter. Google what school of poetry the author of the writer, the poet, comes from. Was this a beat writer? Was this a metaphysical poet? Was this someone who just did sonnets? Was this a Jisei, Jisei? Maybe that's something for you, huh? Find those out. And then figure out the themes. Figure out what you believe the themes of that poem are. So then, in this incredible world of knowledge that we live in, everything's at your fingertips. Don't be lazy. I love that poem by Emily Dickinson. So then I go and I Google Emily Dickinson, and I pull up Emily Dickinson's top 25 poems, and I go through those. See, maybe there's something in there I like. Maybe I just really love Emily Dickinson. And Emily Dickinson has 1,775 poems. So if it's only Emily Dickinson that I like, I could live an entire life digging through 1,775 poems and never be bored. Maybe. So Shakespeare. Maybe you like the sonnets by Shakespeare. Well, contemporary to Shakespeare was Christopher Marlowe. I'll give that guy a try. Edmund Spenser. I'll give that guy a try. What's his name? He's probably in here. John Donne. I'll give that guy a little ring, huh? See what he's talking about. He's a metaphysical poet. Maybe there's something in there I like. Maybe that school of poetry is something that I will continue reading. So the Emily Dickinson poem, I Died for Beauty. Maybe I'll look up poems about death. Maybe I'll look up poems about beauty. Maybe I'll look up poems about truth, right? There's all sorts of different things. Once you have some purchase on what it is that you like, go down that route. Because what's going to happen is you're going to find more and more poems, more and more poets, more and more schools of thought, more and more themes that you enjoy. And then you'll get into maybe I just really like imagism. You know what? I don't understand imagism. Those sons of bitches didn't really write about anything, did they? So then you Google imagism. Here's something a lot of people are going to tell you the opposite of. Start with Wikipedia. Because Wikipedia oftentimes is correct by the big ideas. So you go and you find the big ideas and you dig from there. And every Wikipedia article has cited sources. Go find those sources. Anytime someone tells you something like Wikipedia is the devil, and they will tell you Wikipedia is the devil, discontinue listening to that individual immediately. And I know what's happening there is I'm saying that person is the devil. But I'm right. So there are, as easy, as hard as it is to find a poem in a poet that you like, it's going to be that easy to find stuff you dislike. Don't stop. For example, the sonnets, Shakespeare's sonnets, gave me absolute fits. But I love poetry. So I dedicated a summer to sitting down and reading 4 of them at a time. And I read all of them. And then what I did as I was reading them is I would put a little highlighter. I like Sonnet 73. I'm going to highlight down the side of this, and I'm going to come back to this son of a bitch. So then, on a second pass, I got to go back just to the ones I liked. Well, at that point, I really get to break down why. What is it about this one that stuck out to me? Long story short, if you want to love poetry, it's going to be a lot of work. Even if you pick up the very first collection of poetry and you love the very first poem and you say, hey man, how can I get some more of this? That next one might not be as good to you. There's still poems in Emily Dickinson, my favorite poet, a poet without whom I would not be the same. Straight up, flat out, would not be the same person without my collection of Emily Dickinson. There's still poems in that collection that I just don't know what the hell she's talking about. What is she on about now? But I don't let that stop me, because the next one might have that nugget that I absolutely needed. This was a time in my life when I needed the poem, I Am Seated. I've stopped being theirs. Maybe it's I'm seated. I've stopped being theirs. I had never happened upon that poem. But one day, I was just matriculating through this thing, picking haphazard. Let me read this one. Let me read that one. And I stumbled across, I'm seated. I've stopped being theirs. The name they dropped upon my face with water in the country church is finished using now. And they can put it with my dolls, my childhood, and the string of spools I've finished threading too. Baptized before without a choice, but this time consciously of grace unto the supremest name, called to my full, the crescent dropped. Existence's whole arc filled up with one small diadem, my second rank too small, the first crowned, crowning on my father's breast, and a half unconscious queen, but this time adequate, erect, with will to choose or to reject, and I choose just a crown. That is golden. That's brilliant. And I happened upon it. And you, too, will happen upon something that strikes you that hard, if only you put in the effort and the time.